Everyone wants to build a brand, not just a brand, but a power brand, a viral brand. Problem is, few companies know how. Most focus on creating a super cool logo, a catchy tagline, developing their vision of the perfect brand colors, or adding lots of fun features. And then they're disappointed when their brand literally dies on the vine. How could something that fabulous not be a marketplace sensation, they ask? I'm Jane Singer, and welcome back to A Seat at the Table, where each week we sit down with industry leaders, innovators, and entrepreneurs to find out best practices that will lead us to greater success. Today we're joined by Dr. Pieter Steenkamp, founder of Brand for Success, a boutique brand consultancy. He holds a doctorate focused on brand strategy and is a multi-award-winning academic in the marketing department at a university in Cape Town, South Africa, and a visiting professor in Germany. In this podcast, Dr. Steenkamp will be discussing misconceptions behind brand building that lead to failure, what winning brands do that help them outperform competitors, and he'll be explaining his science-based Brand for Success process that helps turn regular businesses into successful, sophisticated brands. So let's sit down with Dr. Pieter Steenkamp and learn how to get our brand strategy back on track. Pieter, thank you so much for being with us here today on A Seat at the Table. It is wonderful to have you on the show. I'm really excited to hear about what your view is on branding. It's such an important topic these days, especially in a very crowded international market. Brands have to fight even harder to stand out. It was easier, it didn't seem so back in the day, but nowadays when we literally have no boundaries, right? We have to be able to stand out, not just amongst everybody who's in our immediate market, but literally everybody from anywhere else in the world who potentially could be targeting our same customers. Now, what do you see as some of the biggest mistakes that brands make?
Yeah, so we're getting right into it. I would say it is putting tactics in front of strategy. It's much more difficult to convince business leaders, business owners, entrepreneurs, and managers to do brand strategy. It's much easier for them to focus on tactics. And we also know that there are business pressures and we need sales and we have to hit our targets. So it's much easier to focus on advertising, social media campaigns, and even design. And brand strategy, it's as if brand strategy, we get it, that it's important. It's all around us. Everyone says it's important, but it is never urgent. But our tactics are urgent. And then we get into tactics, daily, and we are all over the show, and it is not informed by a coherent strategy. So I would say that is probably the point where we go wrong, and it's critical.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a really good point because you're right. It is very easy to get caught up in sort of the fun things, right? Designing the logo. People love to design the logo. They love to get into what colors should we have and how can we tweak the logo to make it better or a better brand name when, as you're saying, none of that matters when you don't have a strategy in mind. And, it is very tempting. It's a lot more fun, right, for the team to work on those things than do the heavy lifting, which is trying to come up with that unique positioning.
Yeah, and I think that some people will already say, yes, but we put strategy first, and I'm very glad then to hear that. If that is your case, that you have figured out your strategy and you know what your brand wants to stand for, I then would say your issue is probably to do with alignment, aligning your team, aligning your communication to that clarity that you have decided to stand for. So it's often one of those two.
Yes, that's very well said. Now, what would you say from your point of view then are the secrets of successful brands? When you look at brands out there, the ones that are doing really well, what do they get right?
Yeah, I'm in a very good position actually to answer that because I'm also the co-leader of the Brand and Digital Research Hub at our university here in Cape Town. And we study and we research businesses and brands and, successful brands, what works and what doesn't work and what you're supposed to do and what they actually do. Often these brands are groundbreakers, they're innovative, they actually lead us. And then we try and distill these things. But what we've noticed is that most businesses are actually not building brands. they are running perpetual sales promotions. And if that is the situation, it is a hectic situation for people to work at. It is frantic, like I said, it is hectic, and it is often not sustainable. We need to successful businesses have a brand orientation. They believe and they buy into the fact that their reason for existence is to build brands, and that their brands are the most valuable assets, and that is actually where the value lies. Because our research showed that for services businesses, up to about 80% of the value of the business is its brand. And even for product-based businesses, between about 60 and 65% of the value of the business is its brand. Now, because this is so, successful businesses know that they need to build brands. So that is the first thing. It's an absolute orientation, leadership buy-in. They live their brand, and the teams live their brand, and that is what the business is about. And then I see that successful businesses, brand building and brand comes from the inside. It's an inside out. It is knowing who we are, what we stand for, our authenticity, and the resources we have to make that and to deliver on that brand. It is not just like a couple of years back where you identify a gap in the market and then you contort what you do to fit into that market. That is very short-lived. So know your strengths, know what you can deliver on. And then if I can, maybe one more thing that we talked about last week actually is that there's a golden ratio of about 60 to 40% that you need to spend on brand building versus sales activation or conversion. So these things are well defined.
Can you explain a little bit about that?
Yes. So brand building, communicating, and the majority of your communication, your people and your advertising and all of that should be about who you are as a brand, what differentiates you as a brand, and telling that story. And then only 40%, so the minority should be buy from us, buy now, hit this button. That should be secondary, and keep on telling people the majority of the time just how you are different, how you're going to transform their lives. You should lead with that.
So in other words, what you're saying is that because brands are too promotional focused, right, drive sales as much as they can, as fast as they can, and you can understand why, because everybody has targets they have to meet. But I think what you're saying is that they're spending too much time on the promotion, on the call to action, as they say. They're just focusing on sell, and nobody's built any brand value. Nobody's actually positioned the brand or created, as you might say, that sense of why do I even want this, other than that it's on sale for 50% off.
And then if you are known for that 50% off, people wait around for that 50% off. You've got a brand when you can actually charge a price premium and people seek you out over your competitors. The opposite of debranding is competing on price over and over. You can from time to time compete on price, but that shouldn't be your major thing. So you are actually commoditizing yourself by just being the sales promotion and in a discount situation.
Yeah, isn't that the truth? And we've seen that happen in recent years with almost every product. I would say probably the exception might be Apple, which never discounts, or at least in most markets. They hold quite firm, and people love Apple, and they're going to buy that iPhone or Mac or whatever it is without too much consideration of the price. But for just about every other brand, you can really see how much they've leaned into discounting. And it's, as you're saying, it's gotten most of them into trouble. Even someone as powerful as Nike went through 2 years of very disappointing earnings. And, as they're openly admitting, they lost the brand value, and they need to now dial it back. And you hear so many more brands that are now coming forward and saying, we lost our way, so to speak. We just jumped into this whole discounting and, like you say, jump on every new thing, chase every trend. regardless of whether that's really who we are. So I think these are very valid points.
And here is maybe a quick trick, or let's say a quick trick. If you in a tough situation where we have to compete on price, and we go through business cycles, we understand this, but this is how you should then do it. Let's say something very consumer oriented like crisps or chips, as it's called this side of the world. Rather than, if this is, I don't know, $2, rather than discounting it to 150, rather give more of your product, 10% more, and make it clear that this is extra at the same price. People still feel the value. But then when you're out of that cycle, it's easier to take that extra that you gave away and people won't be upset. But if you discount it to 150 and then later, when you're going out of the business cycle, to increase the price again, people say, why? Why now this huge increase? So that is the way to get around that.
I think that's such a great strategy, because you're absolutely right. You get caught into that price trap because people don't want to pay more. There's nothing people hate more than a price increase. $1 increase, and people are already angry, and they'll very happy trade out of what you do just because it was $1, even if it's on something where $1 is a very small part of the total price. It really, really rubs people the wrong way to see a price increase. But you're right, you can play around with that extra thing that you order, that you order, the bonus or the, extra large size at the same price. I think that's an absolutely brilliant idea. And there's so many ways that brands, depending upon the product you make, could, execute on that. It's just a matter of, like you say, getting out of the habit of always trying to work on promotions and discounts.
And that example you used from Nike, they thought they were onto something to trade directly with their customers. They're cutting out all the middlemen, and then they can reduce their prices and everyone will be happy.
Right.
But what they lost in the middle here was all the value that their intermediaries brought to the party. And people were actually valuing that and prepared to pay for that. And now they need to reverse and bring all of that back with huge price increases. They are in a very difficult situation.
I think you're absolutely right about that. It's interesting because that has been a very big trend, certainly in the apparel and footwear industry, where everybody wanted to go direct. People saw these, D2C brands, and they felt if they can do it, we can do it. Not necessarily a parallel, but it was looked at as a parallel situation. And as you're pointing out, people have learned that actually that wholesale aspect plays a very valuable role, that your wholesaler brings a lot to the table, specifically traffic.
Definitely. They've got the infrastructure that you now need to duplicate, the people, the knowledge, the salespeople. All of that can't just disappear. It works for a while, but only for a short while.
Well, that's the thing. I think it's also difficult for many brands that are public companies, where you're incentivized to make those quarterly targets. It's very difficult when the company as a whole rewards you or punishes you, depending upon how your quarterly performance is. And we all know a quarter is really short. So you're always playing that short game. And ultimately, with almost every one of these brands, the long game doesn't play out very well. You end up, someone eventually gets caught when it doesn't work anymore, and then bam, everything just crashes.
Definitely. And then CEOs that operate like that, they have to keep on moving on and moving on to the next brand. And then someone else needs to sort it out, and then it takes a while.
Well, that's just it. You have to really think about whether you're going to be the unlucky guy who comes in when you can't push it one more quarter. And you don't always know that, but that's the big strategy, is like, do you think I can possibly squeeze a few quarters out of this before everything can get out, before everything crashes?
And the bigger bonus,
right.
And then whatever comes behind is not my problem.
Well, that's just it. And it's sad, but we do see so many brands that previously were very strong brands, were well respected in the market, had been around for a very long time. And one by one, they're dropping like flies. And I
Yeah.
think, the point that you're making about focusing just on tactics and not on strategy, not having the mental discipline to be able to implement long-term strategies, and also, of course, the financial goals that force you to do bad things, not bad things, but things that are strategically bad, in order to keep hitting those shorter targets. It's a big problem, and it's taken down a lot of brands, but at the same time, it's opened up opportunities for new brands to come in, perhaps who are starting with a clean slate and can start off doing it in a sense what you might call the right way. How do you see
And
that?
hopefully we learn from that. But I'm sad to say I don't see that. This pattern is repeating itself over and over, year after year, as you've just said. Yeah.
We're going to take a quick break now, and then we'll be right back.
We were hiring when we were making 50 to 100K monthly losses.
And why? Welcome to episode 1.
I can't think of a single founder who's been around for a decent amount of time in business who hasn't had their tunnel of year. This was that year. We're going to be okay, yeah, Sheree. Some are going to hear this and think, you TDP. But hear me out. You only have to do the math to understand that very soon we were $500,000 down.
Do you think there's an opportunity for newer brands to come in who aren't caught up in that system and to come in hopefully with you might say, the mental discipline or the mental toughness to say, this is who we are and we're going to just stick with this and not waver? Or do you think that ultimately everybody goes that?
I think so. Well, it would be great and it would be the ideal. But for that to happen, you have to have people that have been around the block, that has been around for many years through a couple of business cycles. People with enough gravitas, people that are trusted enough to say, just hang on, we need to play the longer game. And often startups, they don't come with people that have been around the block and through the cycles a lot. So for them also, it works for a while. And we all need to be under 30 years old, and we don't value the experience. We don't blend it very well. And then we just repeat it. And in those situations, we actually see that those businesses go bust even quicker. For the others, it is a slower process. But what we see lately is you rise and then you just burn out quickly. We have to somehow combine the two. And that is maybe the secret sauce.
I think that's really interesting. And I think it is interesting to see which of the brands that come on that are new and hot and really take off like a rocket, how many of those brands will sustain and how many will be, as you're pointing out, a flash in the pan, something that everybody wants to have until suddenly nobody wants to have it because it's more of a fad, right? They haven't been able to figure out how to build that long-term brand value with the market.
I hope all of them will succeed. We need businesses, brands to create jobs and to grow the economy, and we know all of it. I hope all of them will, but we know it doesn't work like that.
Now, I understand that you have developed what you refer to as your brand for success process, that it's a science-based 3-step brand process. Tell me a little bit about what you're doing and how that goes. I think everyone listening to this program would really love to hear that, particularly something that's science-based.
Thank you very much for that. And it's based on my 20 years of brand research and teaching and consulting and applying it in industry. So over the time I realized that we need to make these deep brand knowledge that is often complicated more accessible to everyone out there that doesn't have the 10 and 15 years to learn and get an MBA and get a doctorate in brand strategy. And this is where the brand for success process comes from. And it just has 3 steps. Step number 1 is clarify what you want your brand to ideally stand for. And that's the main thing. It takes time and deep diving and figure that out. And then step number 2 is then you focus your team as brand ambassadors. Because this is another key thing in the time of AI and era we are in. Brands now need to rely even more on their people. And I call it personification. Your team has to be your first and most visible brand ambassadors. That's what we need to build it on. And then step number 3, so step 2 is internal branding, and that must come first. And we skip that step, and it's a continuous thing. And then step number 3 is once you know what you want to stand for, your team buys into it, and they are your ambassadors, then you align everything else you do. Then you align your communication and your website and your social media and all of that to that clarity. Because here's this thing, if a business today, let's say they post something on their LinkedIn account, their impressions or their reach is as low as 2% or 3%. This is how dialed down it is today, because these companies want you to pay for spreading the word. But if you can get your team to post the same thing on their platform, you immediately have a 10 and a 12% reach. And if you multiply that, you've got one company at a 2%, and you've got 50 people working there, and they can all duplicate that at a 10 and a 12%. This is where the game is now at. But it all starts with this framework. Clarify, focus your team as ambassadors, and then align everything else that you do to that.
That's such a great strategy. And I think that you're right. It's simple enough that people can execute on it quickly. A matter of taking a moment or two to understand what this means, committing to sticking to it, but at least you don't have to then, spend, as you're saying, years and years trying to get this formalized education to eventually do it, which that most people probably will not be able to do. So I love that strategy. I think it's fantastic.
Yeah, and it works. It's not just theory, it's been applied in industry. It works very well. And the other side of this, if you do not do this in this 3-step process, you end up for years and years going back and forth, trying this and then trying that, having to reverse. And the whole time you are attaching associations to your node in customers' minds that is very difficult to erase if it is possible at all. So you need to be clear as soon as you can. But even if you've been around for a while, get back to the basics, get your workshop going, clarify, and then from there on, play up the core associations that you want to stand for, and just don't mention those incorrect associations that you've been running on for so long. And off you go.
Fantastic. Now, anytime people implement a program of any sort, there's always areas that are easier to implement and aspects of it that are more difficult, right? That you can get going on early and then you sort of hit a wall or a dip, if you wish to call it that. What in this process are the areas where people tend to get stuck? And when they do, how would you recommend that they sort of power through that or get themselves back up?
Oh, this is so important, and I track these things, and I want to be honest, even with a structured process like this, only 12.4% of businesses actually implement and go through with it. So you can imagine, without a structured process, where are we? We are in 1 or 2%. And where it gets stuck is actually more of a meta issue. It is the fact that culture eats strategy for breakfast. You have got a culture in your business, a way that people are used to, and you come in with the best strategy and let's say 100% correct way that we need to go. Still, you have to take your people with you, and people move at different paces, and you need to spend enough time. Therefore, you start with your senior management, you get them into a workshop, you get them into the pre-work so that they can start understanding and start buying in, because this is where it goes wrong. And then at some point, people start protecting their turf, whether it's the head of HR or the head of finance, or it's always someone else. But this is actually where it goes wrong. Not within the 19 to 23 things that you can do, but it is this meta issue that you need to sort out. And then you need to remind people over and over, this never stops. Maybe use a newsletter letter internally, or you have annual touch-up exercises that you do with your people. Then you need to do it over and over. But where it goes wrong is with this one brand building block, and it is with people. Either blocking it, gatekeepers, not understanding it. It's with the people aspect where it goes wrong.
Wow, I think that's fantastic. And you're right, you've pointed out a lot of things that you need to know about, because you want to know this strategy, you want to know a framework, but it's also important to understand where the train could jump the tracks. So in advance, you're sort of planning for, okay, well, it's likely we'll start to stray here. And when we do, this is how, these are the red flags, and this is things we could do to get back on track. So I'm really glad that your strategy also includes that kind of important course correction for people.
2 weeks back, at a brand workshop, at a point I said, whoa, we need to stop. I can't just let that go, because I've heard this specific thing before. This is where it goes off the rails. I just want to make you aware of this. We can't just let it go. So over time, what happens, and you can underpin it.
Yeah, I think that's important. And I certainly would suggest that anybody who is listening to this podcast, who's interested in brands and really wants to be able to understand more about the brands and do better, they should check out some of the books that you've co-authored. I understand that you have several books that you've written with another author on service brand management and marketing management textbooks. That might be something that's worth looking at.
Yeah, that's right. We actually launched the marketing management integrated perspectives last week, Friday, in Cape Town. It was a lovely event. Just to share it with everyone. So that is what we do to contribute. We have to share knowledge, but it's not just about knowledge. People today don't want information only anymore. They want transformation. So our focus on the evening was on these tidbits that people can implement and that they can, quickly make a difference. And then around that, you get the heavier theories, but it must be underpinned by that.
I think that's really, really important. And I like the fact that you're trying to make this information more available to people so that everybody can have an opportunity to learn more about branding and build a better brand for their company. Because like you said, a brand is really that's the core asset that your company has. That's your big asset. And if you're not protecting it and trying to develop it, you have to wonder where you're going as a business, right? You're missing a huge opportunity.
Absolutely. I'm 100% convinced, more now than 20 years back, that nothing is more important than building your brand. This is what gives you longevity. This is what gives the doors open for people to have a place to go to work. This is what gives the return on investment. It is the most valuable asset that you've got, and that must drive your entire business. But then, you attend functions like, also last week I attended a launch by a friend of mine on top of Table Mountain. And I was in a crowd network of advertising and marketing people. So you introduce yourself as you do, who are you? And then they ask, and what do you do? So I'm into brand strategy and I'm a brand academic. And then still the comeback is, oh yes, we redesigned our brand not too long ago. We redesigned our logo not too long ago. We are still there. It boggles my mind. And at the same time, it shows that we've got more work to do. But if we are still at the point where we think brand equals logo, we are in trouble, Jane.
Well, unfortunately, a lot of people do think that, but hopefully some of the people who are listening to this program will at least have been given the thought that maybe they want to think about it from a different point of view. And certainly, it's not an easy path to take to be able, it's easy to work on the logo, to work on the colors, to work on, various other fun aspects. But for the few who actually do the hard work, the long-term benefits, as you're pointing out, are massive.
Yeah, there must be that one thing that you figure out that you want to stand for. Like with a sparkling wine brand we worked with, they didn't want to be frivolous. So we worked out that they want to stand for stuff that really matters. So their positioning is all about celebrate what matters. And once you've got that, your advertising agencies, everyone now knows, please don't include balloons and people jumping up and down in our communication. But it is that thing that you want to stand for, and it influences everything else you do. And in this framework I've got, there are between 19 and 23 of these things, and you can combine some of them, but we've got it down to a list. And all brands pick and choose from that list. And then you just stick to that, and you align with that, and you run with it long term.
Well, Peter, I'm going to make sure that all of the links to connect with you are in the show notes for this episode, or if you're watching as a video, they'll be in the description area. And I want to thank you so much for joining us here on A Seat at the Table and sharing your wisdom and your expertise with us. Really, it's been fantastic. Thank you.
And thank you for the opportunity. It's an honor. And thank you, Jane, for the work you are doing to really make a difference.
My pleasure. Thanks again, Peter.
Thanks for being with us here today on A Seat at the Table. If you'd like to see some of the other episodes, head on over to our podcast website at seat.fm. That's SEAT.fm. There's also a link here in the show notes. And if you're thinking that you'd like to be a guest on the show, you'll find information on how to apply there as well. Thanks again for joining us. I'm Jane Singer, and I will see you in the next episode.